let's go ahead and work this out so that if you have any questions, we'll stop and we'll go through the process. We have this topic because it was requested at our last meeting. So as a result, I was asked by Cindy to go ahead and develop it. Hi there. Who now has productivity standards in place? Raise your hands. Okay. Who's thinking about doing it? Good. It's a good thing to do. All right, let's start. If you're talking about performance standards, pardon me, you really have to begin at the very beginning at the performance management part. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to systematically handle how our teams do the work they do and have some metrics in place to ensure that we can provide a standard and consistent evaluation of those folks, and then ultimately a reward, okay? And by the way, I'm not lazy. I'm sitting down because I have Lyme disease, and as a public service announcement, let me tell you that if you have issues related to your health and people tell you that maybe you have fibromyalgia or if you have MS or something like that, get tested for Lyme disease. That's what I have. And it's caused me some major problems, but it's hard to detect. So that's the reason for my sitting. So what we're talking about is setting expectations for people that do high volume turnover of work and having a means to actually measure what the output is on a continuing basis, all right? And then we can rate that performance against the standards that we're going to talk about developing and ultimately to reward the performance that is done. Now, if we're talking about official records here, we're talking about, for the sake of our discussion, basically 4 different areas or groups. Recording, library and mail services where the mail comes in or whatever the case is, indexing, and in many instances we have marriage license as a part of that, okay? And what I've done is I've broken down the official records piece so that we can look at this in terms of what do we really have to look at. So before, and I'm going to just skip ahead here because this is, I think, important. This is the hierarchy of work units. And for those of us who have been in the methods and procedures business for years, you start at the bottom, and what you're looking for are the tasks. The tasks are actually the simplest action that takes place to accomplish a given goal. An activity is 2 or more tasks that collectively create some output. A process would be several activities that will ultimately lend themselves to a function which in fact becomes a part of an overall system. So let's take a look at this. The task might be opening mail in official records. The activity might be scanning that mail, all right? The process might be uploading and moving that to the system whereby the function of recording begins, a multiplicity of activities and processes which lend themselves to the overall recording system. Are we clear on that? Good, good. Okay, let's go back. Okay. So what we're really talking about here are activities within recording, because you've got to be able to clearly define what the activities are before you can identify the metrics that you're going to assign to those. So in the case of recording, we're processing documents for recording that are brought in by person, coming in through e-record, or delivered by mail. Calculating and collecting the required fees and taxes, assigning an instrument number or a book and page number, whatever the case is, and communicating with the customer in the instance that there are related issues. So if we're talking about, on a high level, what are some of these things? Processing, so we have technology issues, calculating, collecting, and cash management, assigning an instrument number, so system-related activities, and communicating with the customer, obviously the communications issues related to that, all right? Library and mail services, the same thing, processing the incoming mail, scanning the documents, aiding the customers and assisting in retrieving the requested documents and understanding what people are seeking as they come into our offices, returning those processes by mail or courier, and taking customer requests over the phone, whereby we actually allow for those requests to be satisfied. And once again, we're looking at large topics whereby those people will have the opportunity to perform given responsibilities. Okay, indexing, a little bit different because it's very detail-oriented. We're talking about quality control. We're talking about interpretation. That's a tricky one. That requires a higher level of knowledge of the system and otherwise, okay? Description assignment with a legal description assignment, that's critical to the process, and certainly ensuring an accurate and quality image. Now in Hillsborough, I can tell you that one of the things we do is we assign responsibility for the accuracy of the system documents that go out onto the internet to the indexer, because that is the last person that touches the document before it goes to the releaser. And for that reason, if in fact the public calls in and says there's a mistake on my document, that's one of the metrics that we use with the indexers, because we feel like that's a part of their responsibility. They're the last set of eyes in a series of looks to that document, all right? Releasing the document to the internet, making it a part of the public record, and responding to inquiries regarding documents found on the website. Any questions? They go out in a temporary unverified status, okay? They have a U on them. And then once they're verified, 2 days later, and people call in all the time and say, "What's this U?" And we have to tell them, so I don't know who did that, but yeah. That's right. That's right. But at least it gets the information out there, and that's what's critical. We have, for the most part, once it gets into the system, between a 1 to 2 day turnaround. So we stay right on top of things, okay? All right, we already talked about the hierarchy of work units. This is critical. Anybody who's going to do production standards development needs to understand this chart, because if you don't, I promise you it will be really difficult, really difficult. Because if you don't know the difference between a process or a task, it's going to become more difficult as you go. Everybody got that? Okay, good. All right, and here's where I actually define what the tasks and activities are. And I'll just give you a minute to look at that. And the most important one is right at the top. A system is a grouping of functions that is designed to manage the organization's broad range of goods and services. So in essence, the recording output, is really what's critical to the process. And unless we understand the tasks, activities, processes, and functions within that, it's likely that we're not going to be able to develop good performance standards. Okay? All right. Now, let's talk about where do we start. Once we have a broad understanding of the experience, start with the job description. And I have to tell you, if you don't have a detailed job description, do one. You need one. You need to be able to say something more and all duties as assigned. That doesn't work, folks, okay? So look for the tasks which are measurable and also critical. You don't want to pick up on everything, but you want to really understand what are the things that are going to be make it or break it in this process, okay? And seek the repetitive and high volume tasks where you're going to actually do the measurements. And we'll talk about, what to measure and that kind of thing as we go along. A standard needs to be, number one, measurable so it can compare performance from year to year or cycle to cycle. So what does that tell us? It tells us we have to have data. We have to keep track of how much happens. When I went to official records 6 years ago, we had nothing. I mean, we had almost 80 people in the organization, and I said, how many transactions do we do a day? And they said, oh, a whole bunch. And I mean, you know, in fairness, we had just come onto a brand new system that certainly had that information available. Today, we know everything about the organization. We know about how many documents we have. We know how many errors took place. We know how many minutes it took per person, per transaction. There's a lot of data that's available in your recording system. Make use of it, okay? The repetitive and high volume tests are the ones that you really want to capture because, you know, there's two things about developing production standards that I think are critically important, and it's Newton's first and second law of motion. You know, a body at rest tends to stay at rest, and a body in motion tends to stay in motion. Well, when you're doing repetitive and high volume tasks, it's easy to keep going, or it's easy to just say, oh man, I can't do any more. It happens. It's a part of the human behavior. So as a result, we need to be in a place to understand what's going on. However, in Newton's second law of motion, to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, okay? What it means is that if I'm putting this stuff in, if I'm inputting that data constantly, every single day, there is a reaction. It's either going to be accurate or else we're going to get a reaction from a customer who says, oh, by the way, this is all wrong. They spelled my name wrong, you know, my mother's address is whatever, you know, all the things that our customers tell us. So the standard needs to be measurable. We need to have statistical data over a period of time and understand something. Not even a few months will work because we know if you're talking about the recording business, there are highs and lows, all right? And based on that, you know, you have to be able to look at, you know, how much work is coming in. And actually, what I did was I was able to watch the workflow as it came through the organization. So I could actually move people around if we had, you know, 12 trays of mail that came in or 18 trays of mail on a Monday morning, we could assign people to help get that through. But that meant I also had to put them into R1 and R2 and cashiering and move them through the process because there was so much of a bulk that actually started coming through. It enables performance comparisons from one employee to another. Now, I can tell you that we have in our system, and we use Aptitude, we have the ability to actually go out and look at what everybody's output is. We used to make that available to the employees. We don't anymore because I thought we were going to probably have people fighting. They were like, well, you did 27 and I did, you know, no, we're not doing that. So one of the things we do is we make that information available to the employee. And if they ask about other people, we tell them, this is about you, not about others. And maintaining those annual volumes to create a baseline. You know, I think that's really important in terms of identifying what your resource requirements and your labor is going to have to be. So one of the first things you have to do after you identify the tasks and you look at all the things that the people are doing is you begin to build a database or gather historical data. And you know, Excel is a wonderful way to do it. You can use great charts. And if you need to see charts, send me an email and I'll be happy to send you charts. We capture data on incoming telephone calls and the phone pods, the mail that comes in, the amount of revenue that we collect both at the counter, on e-file, and no charge, which is the judgment stuff that comes over through the courts. And you know, it's interesting because about a year ago, somebody came to me and said, gee, I've noticed when I come to official records that there's not a lot of people. You're not very busy over there. And I said, what do you mean we're not very busy? We were doing 2,700 transactions a day. And I said, what do you mean we're not busy? They said, well, yeah, there was hardly anybody in there. I said, that's because our e-record is up to around 53% right now. If you don't know that, people will make judgments about your resources and your ability to manage the organization. So you need to know as the leaders, what that is. So we're talking about quantity, certainly is one of the things we're going to see. Quality, critically important. Remember I talked about how we asked the indexers to be responsible for when people call in about their stuff. We go back and look at the transaction, see who did it, and unfortunately they get charged with that error. And consider a broad range of numbers, pardon me, in that database that we're talking about. And what is the impact of the errors? This is important. If I make a calculation error and I have to go back to the customer because I've not done it properly, well, that's one thing. But there's software out there that actually does the calculations for us now. So there's really no reason for that. But if in fact we have people calling up to say we've made errors by putting out erroneous documents out on the internet, we consider that a critical error. So look at those in terms of, there are errors and there are errors. And if there are critical errors, you have to be able to readily identify those. Okay, what we did is we took every person's input and then we created, as you can see on the top there's names of people. Okay, so we know for the months of November through July what their input was. And as a result of that, that begins to develop that database that I was talking about. So you have a pretty broad view of what each person is doing. And eventually what you're going to do is, and that's the historical data I'm talking about. I don't know why there you go. Okay, so in essence what you need to do is begin to develop a midpoint. Now when we talk about midpoint, it's when we look at the averages. So if you've got 10 points, and I'm going to go ahead to the next one. All right, here's the midpoint. You can see it right, this right there. There's your midpoint. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got, in this case, 5 tasks of e-recording. Here's the output on a daily basis. And this is 5 different people, all right, persons 1 through 5. And we come up with the midpoint, all right? And that's important because what you need to do is address that in terms of what your minimum is going to be. You certainly don't want to have a minimum down here at 136 if for the most part everybody is averaging around that midpoint range, okay? So, based on that, we're talking about where there's the same number of people above and below. That's how the midpoint works. This is really based on statistics. And the last time I took statistics, I was in graduate school in 1995. So I didn't want to make it too, academic. I tried to keep it as lay-oriented as possible, if you will. All right, if we look at the incremental levels, we begin with that level 5, and I'll flip over there in a minute, which is 243, and then we subtract 135, which is 1 less than the lowest. Remember that bottom one was 136? All right, the difference is 108. And this is kind of important because this is the formula broken down, all right? So if you want to get this, because you're thinking about doing this, I would definitely make this a part of what you're going to take. We take that difference of 108 and we divide it by the 5 levels. Now the 5 levels could be your points of evaluation. If you have 4 levels of evaluation, marginal, successful, what's the next one? Very good and exceptional, all right, for the purposes of our discussion. That's what you're going to be talking about in terms of what levels you have. And that would give you, dividing 108 by the 5 or 4 levels, the 5 levels in this case, leaves you with 23, which means you're going to have a 23-point spread in between each one of those 5 levels, okay? The other 4 levels will have 1 additional point to make it mathematically correct. I don't know why that is. I'm not a mathematician. I'm just telling you this is how we do it, okay? So that's what you see. Between that 243 and the 136, you subtract it, take 1 off of the 136, and then you go ahead and you work the formula accordingly, all right? So your ranges end up being 126 to 149 is marginal. Now you know you've got to call HR because you've got a problem. 150 to 173 acceptable, 174 to 197, yeah, we're successful. Now this is 5, usually I think there's 4, 198 to 221 outstanding, and the people that are right up there, 243 plus. And as you know, you're always going to have somebody up there. But for the most part, most people are going to end up right in here. Now I will tell you, the one thing that you need to do is you need to stay away from the word average. People hate it. Nobody wants to be called average. It pisses them off royally, okay? I worked in a company of 14,000 several years ago, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a consultant to come on in, and it was the Hayes people, and they came up with the word average. There were 5 levels, and instead of successful, it was average. The whole place went nuts. They had to turn it around and start all over again because nobody wanted to be average. But that's the rating range that you're going to eventually come up with, something like that based on what your numbers are. Anybody have any questions? Okay, good. All right. So what does success look like? What does success look like? The amount of work that an employee produces within a fixed amount of time with quality tolerance standards, all right? And I think that that's one of the things that you have to be able to readily identify. The second thing is you need to help the employee understand what the expectations are. So each of these items needs to be spelled out to the employee so they know what they're running against. Because otherwise you're probably going to end up with the HR people. And we tell them point blank, you will be rated on how well you pace yourself depending on your volume of work, okay? And doing this on a daily basis. Now, we all know that we have up days and down days. So in some instances, what we've done is we've actually said, if you have a bad week, or if you have, a bad time in your life, God knows we all have them. One of the things that we've done in the past is we said we'll drop out the worst day of the week. But one of the things we found is people knew that. And guess what? They always had a really bad day in the week. So we said, that doesn't work so well. But in fairness, I think that, what you're really looking to do is to create something that is indicative of the level of that person. Now, one of the things about standards that you have to be aware of is that you don't want to set them too high, and they have to be changed from time to time, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But as a result, as groups continue to be seasoned, and that's an important piece, and they have the opportunity to actually look at how they do what they do, or they get cross-trained, what you're going to find is their speed will gradually increase because their knowledge of the subject matter continues to grow, that kind of thing. So over a period of time, you may want to look at how is this employee doing, and possibly create a chart for that. There's a wonderful opportunity to show them what they look like over a period of time. Okay, anybody have any questions? All right. So, if we're talking about what does success look like, let's say, for example, we have a front counter person. Well, one of the things we have to do is we have to define what is that person doing. We are expecting them to process a minimum of 90 documents per day. Now, that's not a whole bunch, but we've got to factor in that they have walk-up transactions, they have people that are walking in that are in the wrong place that need to be redirected. We have people that are couriers that, have to stop and tell them they didn't have money for the meter, and they tell them this big long story. So all of that is factored in. The R2, the cashier, the return factor, marriage license and passports. We, in Hillsborough, do not have everybody do everything. We have recording people, and we have marriage license and passport people. And even though they all use the same system, we feel like that line of demarcation is important. So we can say to that person that's a front counter, fully experienced, and by the way, I think you have to break it down a little bit. What is a fully experienced person? Is that 6 months? Is it 12 months? Only you can really determine that. So I think you need to say, for the time being, we're going to be looking at your work until you're here with us for 12 months. Once you're here for 12 months, we're going to apply our productivity standards. So that gives us these daily averages of 187 plus, with the satisfactory, the exceptional, the outstanding. As far as the back office recorder is concerned, the same is true. Their numbers are much higher because they don't have the walk-up customers, the conversations, the explanations, that kind of thing. To those people, we're saying 165 documents a day. And the combination of full service, R1, R2, cashier, index, verify, return, and e-recording. Now, e-recording is a lot less labor intensive. Remember? We come in, the information comes in, we've got to sort the mail, we've got to open it, we've got to scan it, we've got to pass it to the people that are sitting doing R1, R2, and cashiering. Then they send it over to the indexers and the verifiers. With e-recording, they're pulling those documents in, they're making sure that the order is correct, that the amount of the payment is correct, and boom, they go right to it. So once again, you have to factor in some of the differences in this. And if people are doing some or all, then it will average itself out. But if not, I would put in a separate standard for e-record, because those go much faster and the volume is going to be off the charts by comparison to some of the back office people. And once again, it's almost, as you can see, between the experienced full service front counter person and the back office person, we're talking a difference of 100 documents a day. Now, when you're working 220 days a year, that's 22,000 documents. That's appreciable. That's appreciable. Questions? You guys are smart. Okay. All right. Let's talk about administering the standards. It goes without saying, everybody should know. This is not a surprise. It's not something that people sit and at their evaluation and you as their manager look them in the eye and say, and oh, by the way, we have standards. That doesn't and shouldn't happen. They are developed to reflect minimum productivity expectations. They're really also developed to ensure that we have a steady progression of work that doesn't fall off based on the whimsical nature of human behavior. Let's face it, that can be a problem, okay? And then we ensure that the employee understands those requirements. So if you're doing a planning session with your employee, when you sit down, you say, here's what our expectations are of you. A document that is image ready. What does that mean? What does it include? Verification. Each document has the required information. Verifying the fees for receipt, cashiering that document, balancing the money, separating for validation and scanning, okay, removing staples, paper clips, validating related envelopes with instrument numbers for return. I mean, the whole recording process. I sat down at one point and actually walked through it, and I think I came up with I'm going to say something like 51 actual tasks. It's a very complex process. And what we know as people that have managed these organizations is that it takes easily a good 6 months to train a recording person so that they are really able, to handle themselves independently. So we want to make sure in the process of actually bolstering that training and creating that person that's going to be with us, hopefully for a while, that we're going to have them understand what the requirements are. Any questions? Good. All right. Look at how the group performs on a data sheet. And I talked there about a scatter chart. Do y'all know what a scatter chart is? All right, you know, it looks like an L, and then you plot, you know, whatever. So it gives you some idea in terms of what the ranges are, okay? So I can tell by looking at that scatter chart if everything is within the midsection that we're all about the same or we're all over the place, all right? Certainly it's important that if you happen to be lucky enough to get a raise, which we haven't had in 4 years, you have to tie this to performance. You know, if in fact you're just giving an evaluation that has no tie to monetary rewards, in my opinion, you're whistling in the dark. And ensure that employees understand the implications of the level of standard achieved to that percentage or the reward. You know, many instances you get a bucket of money. And if you've got 10 people, you say, well, you know, everybody would be eligible to receive 10% if you are average. If you're falling below that, you know, or above that, you have to be able to allocate those monies accordingly. Otherwise, people are not going to work hard. Why bother? If I'm a slug and I don't do anything, and the man sitting next to me is killing himself, you know, why bother? And then consider changing those standards over a period, since those achievement levels are going to increase. They're going to creep. Now, they're not going to fly up, but you'll see a steady creep as it goes along. So be able to go back and look at that as you do the process here. All right? And in fairness, success does not occur by chance. I mean, this is scientific. This is mathematical. And that's all, folks. We got through that one real easy. Thank you all. You've been a good audience, and I appreciate your ability to hang in there with me. And we'll see you next time.